The dashboard clock glows green in the dark cabin of my car. 7:28 p.m. I rest my hands against the leather steering wheel and watch the lit entrance of the country club across the street. 3 men in matching charcoal uniforms walk past the valet stand. They carry 10 thick envelopes sealed with black wax. In 2 minutes, they will bypass the host stand, walk directly to the VIP table, and hand those envelopes to my mother, my father, and my older brother. Inside those envelopes are federal grand jury subpoenas, a forensic audit, and 18 years of bank records. To understand why I am turning my brother's high society engagement party into a crime scene, you have to go back to a Tuesday afternoon and the cheap, cloying smell of vanilla frosting. Before I tell you what happens when my mother breaks that wax seal, if this story resonates with you, hit like and subscribe to the Eva Tells Stories channel. Drop your city, your local time, and your age in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Leilani. I am 30 years old and I live in Honolulu, Hawaii. Now let me take you back to my 16th birthday, the day I realized my family was not just ignoring me, they were erasing me. The air in July is heavy, thick with salt and humidity. I sat on the back lanai of our house with a frayed textbook on my lap and a stale oat bar in my hand. Through the sliding glass door I could hear voices. My mother Brenda, my father David, and my brother Trevor. They were laughing. A moment later, the shaky, off-key chorus of a celebration drifted through the screen. They were singing to Trevor. Trevor was turning 24 and a half. My mother believed in half-birthdays for her son. She believed in achievement dinners when he managed to hold a minimum wage job for a consecutive month. She believed in buying him a new surfboard when he complained about the local breaks. For me, she believed in chores. I pushed the sliding door open. The kitchen counter held a 2-tiered vanilla cake. Trevor sat on a stool, grinning around a forkful of frosting. My father stood near the sink, polishing a set of keys he had just handed his son. I stood in the doorway. "Mom?" Brenda turned. Her smile vanished, replaced instantly by the tight, pinched expression she reserved only for me. "Wipe your feet, Leilani. You track sand everywhere." "It is July 14th, I said. My voice did not shake. Trevor rolled his eyes and went back to his cake. My father found a sudden, deep interest in the linoleum floor tiles. Brenda crossed her arms over her floral blouse. "I know what the date is," she said. "The property tax is due tomorrow." "It is my birthday," I said. "I am 16 today." The kitchen went dead quiet. The refrigerator hummed. My mother looked at me, her gaze traveling from my worn sneakers to the hand-me-down t-shirt I had owned since the 7th grade. There was no realization on her face, no sudden guilt, just profound irritation. "Don't make everything a production," she said, turning her back to load plates into the dishwasher. "Trevor got a promotion today. Let him have his moment. Go sweep the lanai. The wind blew leaves everywhere." I did not argue. I walked back outside, picked up the broom, and swept the concrete. That was the pattern. No cards, no texts, no passing acknowledgement. From the time I turned 12 until I turned 30, the day of my birth simply did not exist on my family's calendar. I paid for my own clothes by taking night shifts at a local diner. I paid for my own accounting degree by working 40 hours a week while carrying a full course load. Meanwhile, Trevor failed upward. He dropped out of community college. He quit 3 jobs in a single year. Yet, when he turned 28, Brenda handed him the keys to a luxury condo in Waikiki. I'm a financial auditor for a major resort now. My entire career is built on looking at ledgers and finding the exact point where a story stops making sense. I spend my days tracking missing decimals and phantom expenses. So I started looking at my own family. My mother was a mid-level real estate agent who sold maybe 4 houses a year. My father was a substitute teacher. They drove sensible cars and complained about the price of milk. But Trevor drove a sports car that cost more than my parents earned in 2 years. He lived in a neighborhood where the HOA fees alone eclipsed a teacher's salary. The math was wrong. The lifestyle did not match the revenue stream. People do not magically manifest high-rise condos without a paper trail. My mother wanted me to believe she simply forgot my birthday because I did not matter. But auditors know that when a date is scrubbed from a record, it is never an accident. It is a cover-up. And the first crack in her armor happened on a Tuesday, hidden inside a piece of junk mail I was never supposed to see. My shift at the diner ended at 4 in the morning. I walked into my parents' house smelling like stale fryer grease and bleached countertops. My accounting textbooks weighed down my backpack. I was short $340 for the upcoming semester tuition. It was a humiliating amount of money to beg for, but I had exhausted my savings and maxed out my shifts. I found my mother sitting at the kitchen island with her coffee. I placed the printed invoice on the granite counter near her mug. I did not ask for a gift. I asked for a loan. I promised an exact repayment schedule based on my projected diner tips. Brenda looked at the paper as if I had placed a dead insect next to her cup. She pressed her fingertips to her temples and let out a long, ragged sigh. "We are drowning right now," she said. Her voice dripped with practiced exhaustion. "The housing market is stagnant. Your father barely gets enough substitute teaching hours to cover the electric bill. We are scraping the bottom of the barrel just to keep food on this table, Leilani. I need you to be an adult and handle your own responsibilities." I nodded. I folded the invoice, put it back in my backpack, and turned toward the hallway. Before I could take 3 steps, a deep, throaty engine roar vibrated through the living room windows. Tires crunched on the gravel driveway. The front door swung open, and Trevor walked in. He tossed a heavy silver key fob onto the counter, right where my tuition bill had been sitting seconds prior. Outside sat a brand-new slate gray sports coupe with dealer plates. Trevor grinned. He had quit his job as a surf instructor 3 weeks prior because the manager asked him to show up on time. He had 0 income. Yet Brenda stood up, her face transforming from exhausted martyr to radiant joy. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "Your brother needs reliable transportation for his interviews," Brenda said, catching my eye over his shoulder. "The local bus system is just too unreliable for a professional schedule." My mother wanted me to believe the family was broke. She wanted me to believe my brother was simply the beneficiary of a lucky break or a generous loan. But I was studying to be an auditor. The foundational rule of accounting is that numbers lack the capacity to lie. People lie. Ledgers do not. A mid-level real estate agent and a part-time teacher cannot manifest a $70,000 vehicle on a whim. The math was wrong. A hidden revenue stream existed somewhere in this house, and the first concrete piece of evidence arrived on a humid Tuesday afternoon, right inside our rusted metal mailbox. I always checked the mail when I came home from my afternoon classes. It was a mundane chore. Bills, grocery flyers, local coupons. I sifted through the stack while walking up the driveway. Near the bottom, a thick, heavy envelope caught my attention. It was crafted from premium cream cardstock. It did not look like junk mail. I slid it out from under a power bill. In the top left corner sat an embossed logo, a geometric silver shield with the words "Sterling Vanguard Fiduciary Services" printed in sharp, minimalist text. A mainland return address in Delaware sat below the logo. I looked at the center of the envelope. It was not addressed to resident. It was not addressed to occupant. It was addressed to Leilani Kai. My thumb slid under the flap. A shadow crossed the concrete beside me. Fingers dug hard into my wrist. Brenda snatched the envelope from my hand with a sharp, frantic tug. I flinched, stepping back. My mother stood holding the thick envelope against her chest. Her face was flushed dark red from the collar of her blouse to her hairline. Her chest heaved. I had never seen her move that fast in my entire life. "What is this?" she demanded. Her voice cracked. "It has my name on it," I said. Brenda looked down at the embossed silver shield. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed her eyes. She crushed the thick cardstock in her fist, crumpling the edges. "It is a predatory credit card scam," Brenda said. Her breathing remained shallow and fast. "They buy student data from the university and try to trap you in high-interest debt. I read an article about this firm. It goes straight into the shredder." She turned and marched toward the house. She did not throw it in the kitchen trash. She walked directly into my father's home office and shut the solid wood door behind her. I stood in the driveway and listened to the mechanical hum of the paper shredder running for a full minute. I played dumb. I walked inside, poured a glass of water, and did not mention the envelope again. But my auditor instincts locked onto her reaction. People do not experience an adrenaline spike over a credit card offer. Their hands do not shake. They do not sprint to a shredder to destroy a piece of junk mail. My mother was terrified. That heavy cream envelope contained something she was desperate to keep out of my hands. The name Sterling Vanguard Fiduciary Services burned itself into my memory. I tried to research them on my laptop later that night. The website was sparse, locked behind client portals and non-disclosure warnings. It was a boutique firm specializing in high net worth asset management and blind trusts. It was not a credit card company. The tension in our house shifted after that day. Brenda watched me with a cautious, lingering gaze whenever I retrieved the mail. I made sure to act bored, complaining about the heat and my homework, giving her the exact oblivious performance she required to feel safe. Months passed. My silent investigation yielded nothing until Trevor invited us to see his new living arrangement. He had moved out of his bedroom down the hall and into a corner unit on the 36th floor of a Waikiki high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean. The kitchen featured imported quartz countertops and a wine fridge. The monthly homeowners association fee for the building cost more than my annual diner income. Trevor leaned against the kitchen island, swirling a bottle of imported beer. He complained about the glare from the afternoon sun. He complained about the valet parking taking too long. Then he complained about the paperwork. "The property taxes on this place are draining me," Trevor said, shaking his head. "The city reassessed the value last month. I have to submit a secondary draft to cover the difference. It is an endless headache." He reached into his pocket and tossed a leather-bound checkbook onto the quartz counter. It slid to a stop inches from my hand. I looked down. The leather cover was stamped with a logo, a geometric silver shield. My lungs tightened. I stared at the shape. It was the exact same emblem that had been embossed on the heavy cream envelope addressed to me months ago. The same corporate trustee, the same firm my mother claimed was a predatory scam. Trevor did not work in finance. He did not have a trust fund that I knew of. Yet he carried a checkbook issued by an elite mainland fiduciary firm, the very same firm that had tried to contact me. I looked from the checkbook to my brother, and then to my mother, who was busy admiring the ocean view. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with terrifying clarity. My family did not forget my birthday out of carelessness. They did not favor Trevor just because he was the firstborn. The erasure of my existence was tied directly to that silver shield. My mother was hiding a financial entity that bore my name, and Trevor was using it to pay for his view of the ocean. I left the condo that afternoon with a singular goal. I needed to bypass my mother and find the source of the funds. I just did not realize the map to my stolen life had been sitting inside my grandfather's house all along. The answers I needed were not going to arrive in the mail. Brenda made certain of that. The answers were buried on another island entirely, inside a house that smelled like salt spray and old paper. My grandfather passed away in the spring. He was my father's father, a quiet man who spent his life building custom furniture and watching the horizon. His house on Maui sat empty for months while the estate went through probate. When the time came to clear the property for sale, Brenda and David claimed they were too busy managing Trevor's sudden need for interior decorating. They sent me to pack up 70 years of a man's life. I took the inter-island flight on a Friday morning. The house felt hollowed out without him. I spent the first 2 days boxing up dishes, folding threadbare blankets, and sorting through endless stacks of hardware receipts. On the third afternoon, I carried a stack of cardboard boxes into his bedroom. The air in the room felt heavy and stagnant. Against the far wall stood a magnificent cabinet he had carved himself from solid koa wood. Its rich, dark grain rippled under the sunlight filtering through the blinds. I paused in the doorway. A sudden memory broke through the haze of exhaustion. I was 22, sitting beside a hospital bed. The rhythmic hum of monitors provided the only sound in the sterile room. My grandfather lay propped against the pillows, his breathing shallow and labored. His eyes, clouded by medication and age, found mine. He reached out with a trembling hand and gripped my wrist with surprising strength. He did not look at David, who stood in the corner checking his phone. He did not look at Brenda. He looked directly at me. His lips moved, dry and cracked. He lifted one shaky finger and pointed vaguely toward the window, or perhaps toward the idea of his home, miles away across the water. "For when you wake up, Lonnie," he whispered, "look behind the wood." The grip loosened. His hand fell back to the blanket. I assumed the medication was causing hallucinations. We had brushed it off as the confused ramblings of a dying mind. I stepped into the dusty bedroom and walked toward the massive koa cabinet. The memory was no longer a confused rambling. It was a set of instructions. I set the boxes down and gripped the edge of the heavy furniture. Dust coated my fingers. I planted my feet, braced my shoulders, and pulled. The cabinet groaned against the floorboards, resisting my effort. I adjusted my grip and shoved with all my weight. The wood scraped sideways, revealing a rectangular patch of bare wall. Near the baseboard, a section of the drywall was cut neatly into a square panel. It was flush with the surrounding paint, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knelt on the floor and pressed my fingertips against the edge of the panel. It popped loose. I pulled the drywall square away. Recessed into the dark cavity sat a heavy steel wall safe. A digital keypad glowed faintly when I brushed the metal dial. I sat back on my heels. A safe. I did not have a combination. I thought about the man who built this house. He was meticulous. He favored dates, anniversaries, and milestones. I keyed in his wedding anniversary. A red light flashed. Access denied. I tried my father's birthday. Red light. Access denied. I tried Trevor's birthday. Red light. I stared at the glowing keypad. The air in the room felt suddenly cold. My grandfather had looked at me and said, "For when you wake up, Lonnie." He did not say Trevor. He did not say David. I raised a trembling finger. I punched in the numbers representing the month, day, and year of my own birth. The date my family had methodically erased from existence for nearly 2 decades. The date that was never celebrated, never acknowledged, and never spoken out loud in our home. A sharp metallic click echoed in the quiet room. The light turned green. I gripped the heavy steel handle and pulled. The heavy door swung open smoothly on oiled hinges. Inside the dark cavity lay a single, thick leather portfolio. I reached in and pulled the heavy binder onto my lap. My hands felt cold and numb. I unzipped the leather casing. A stack of crisp, thick documents sat inside, protected by clear plastic sleeves. The first page bore a familiar logo, a geometric silver shield, Sterling Vanguard Fiduciary Services. Below the logo sat the title of the document, printed in bold black ink, Irrevocable Trust Agreement. My eyes scanned the legal phrasing, skipping past the boilerplate definitions until I found the names. The grantor was my grandfather. The sole, exclusive beneficiary was Leilani Kai. I turned the page. The numbers leaped off the paper, sharp and undeniable. The initial principal corpus deposited into the trust was $1.8 million. My breath hitched. I traced the numbers with my index finger to ensure my eyes were not failing me. $1.8 million. I flipped to the disbursement schedule. The legal language was dense, but my accounting degree allowed me to translate the intent perfectly. My grandfather knew Brenda was a vulture. He knew David was weak. He bypassed them entirely. The trust stipulated that the funds would sit untouched, accumulating interest in aggressive growth portfolios throughout my childhood. The money would fully vest the day I turned 18. Upon vesting, the corporate trustee in Delaware was instructed to release massive dividend payments annually. The schedule mandated that these payments be dispersed on the exact date of my birth, every single year. I lowered the portfolio to the floor. The dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight crossing the room. The silence in the house felt deafening. The erasure of my birthday was never about a lack of love. It was never about being a difficult teenager. It was a calculated, sociopathic smokescreen. If my parents never acknowledged the day I was born, if they conditioned me to treat July 14th as just another Tuesday where the property tax was due, I would never expect a celebration. I would never check the mail for a card. I would never ask why an envelope from Delaware arrived in the middle of summer. They erased my birthday so they could quietly collect the harvest. My mother had watched me eat stale granola bars. She had watched me pull double shifts smelling like fryer grease. She had watched me beg for tuition money, all while intercepting an annual dividend check large enough to buy a house in cash. I opened the back section of the portfolio. My grandfather had kept copies of the preliminary bank statements. The trust was real. The money was generating staggering returns. The math I had questioned for years finally balanced perfectly. Trevor's condo, Trevor's sports car, the extravagant lifestyle my parents funded while claiming poverty. It was all paid for with my stolen life. I did not scream. I did not throw the portfolio against the wall or dissolve into a puddle of tears. My grief had burned away, leaving behind a cold, crystalline focus. I was an auditor. My family had just provided me with the raw data of a massive financial crime. If I confronted them now, Brenda would panic. She would leverage her position as my parent to move the remaining funds offshore before I could secure legal representation. A screaming match would give them time to destroy the paper trail. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the camera application. I flattened every single document on the floorboards. I photographed the title page. I photographed the disbursement schedule. I photographed the routing numbers and the corporate trustee contact information. I captured high-resolution images of every single clause my grandfather had drafted to protect me. When I finished, I placed the documents back into the plastic sleeves. I zipped the leather portfolio closed and set it carefully back inside the floor safe. I shut the heavy steel door, spun the dial to scramble the lock, and slid the square panel of drywall back into place. I dragged the heavy koa wood cabinet over the hidden compartment, erasing any trace that I had ever been there. I stood up and brushed the dust from my jeans. The girl who begged for tuition money was gone. She died on the floor of that dusty bedroom. The woman standing in her place held a loaded gun disguised as a camera roll. My parents thought they were clever by hiding the money. They were about to discover the hard way that to steal a trust fund, you need a signature. And forging the signature of a forensic auditor is the quickest path to a federal indictment. The flight back to Honolulu felt different. The roar of the jet engines faded into a low, white noise. My mind churned through the logistics of the fraud, mapping out the mechanics of a crime that had spanned my entire adult life. I leaned my head against the scratchy airplane window and closed my eyes. The pieces of the puzzle began snapping into place with cold, mechanical precision. The most glaring question had been gnawing at the edge of my consciousness since I opened that floor safe. A minor cannot legally execute a trust disbursement. My signature at age 12 held zero legal authority. A mainland corporate trustee like Sterling Vanguard would never release a massive dividend to an underage beneficiary without a court-appointed guardian providing extreme oversight. So how did Brenda manage to steal the money without triggering federal alarms? The answer was patience. Brenda and David played an agonizingly long game. They knew the trust was locked tight during my childhood. They could not touch the principal. But they knew the exact date the vault would automatically unlock. The trust vested fully the moment I turned 18. The second I became a legal adult, the corporate trustee was mandated to begin releasing the annual dividends directly to my name. The 18-year birthday amnesia was not just cruel. It was a required grooming process. By the time I hit 18, I had been conditioned to expect absolute silence on July 14th. I did not ask for presents. I did not look for cards in the mail. I woke up, went to my shift at the diner, and treated the day like any other exhausting Tuesday. Because I was oblivious, Brenda moved with impunity. I pulled my laptop from my bag as soon as the seatbelt sign chimed off in the terminal. I sat on a hard plastic bench near the baggage claim and opened the secure photo vault on my phone. The images from my grandfather's safe glowed sharp and bright on the screen. I zoomed in on a specific document tucked near the back of the leather portfolio. It was a carbon copy of a change of address form filed with Sterling Vanguard. The date stamp read July 15th, exactly one day after my 18th birthday. The form officially rerouted all correspondence, tax documents, and dividend checks from our home address to a private post office box in a neighboring zip code. Brenda had intercepted the mail. She ensured that the corporate trustee in Delaware believed they were communicating directly with me. The heavy cream envelope I had found in the driveway months ago must have been a clerical error, a stray piece of marketing material that somehow bypassed the P.O. Box protocol. Her sheer panic that day suddenly made terrifying sense. That single envelope threatened to dismantle a decade of meticulous mail fraud. I scrolled to the next photograph. It was a copy of a cleared check drawn from the trust account, dated shortly after my 19th birthday. The amount was staggering, $45,000. I stared at the back of the check. The endorsement line required my signature to authorize the deposit. The name Leilani Kai was written across the line. My breath caught in my throat. I zoomed in until the blue ink filled the entire screen of my phone. The signature was a forgery, but it was not a sophisticated one. The person who signed my name did not even attempt to mimic my sharp, cramped handwriting. The letters were wide, arrogant, and excessively slanted. The capital K looped dramatically, trailing off in a flourish. I recognized that handwriting instantly. It was the exact same script that signed my middle school permission slips. It was the exact same script that wrote grocery lists and passive-aggressive sticky notes left on the kitchen counter. It was Brenda's handwriting. She had not bothered to practice my signature because she believed her crime was bulletproof. She believed the daughter who swept the lanai and ate stale granola bars was too stupid, too broken, and too beaten down to ever request a financial audit. Her arrogance was so profound that she signed her own felony with a flourish. I swiped through the remaining photos, check after check, year after year. $45,000, $60,000, $85,000 as the trust yielded higher returns. Every single endorsement bore the same arrogant, looping cursive. My parents had constructed a shadow economy, using my identity as the foundation. They funneled my money into shell accounts, feeding Trevor's bottomless appetite for luxury, while telling me the family was drowning in debt. They watched me struggle to pay for textbooks with money I earned scrubbing grease off a griddle. I closed my laptop and slid it back into my bag. The terminal bustled with tourists dragging colorful luggage, entirely unaware of the woman sitting quietly on a plastic bench, recalibrating her entire existence. I did not shed a single tear. The initial shock had crystallized into a pure, concentrated fury, a slow-burning anger that demanded absolute precision. My auditor brain took over, categorizing the emotions and filing them away. The data was clear. My mother was operating a criminal enterprise. My father was a willing accomplice. My brother was the primary beneficiary of stolen assets. The urge to drive straight to their house, kick the front door open, and hurl the evidence onto the kitchen island was overwhelming. The desire to scream, to demand answers, to watch Brenda's smug face shatter was a visceral hunger in my chest. But I pushed the urge down. Confrontation was the refuge of the weak. A screaming match would give Brenda the one thing she desperately needed: warning. If I confronted them now, Brenda would instantly realize her cover was blown. She would know the paper trail was exposed. A desperate, cornered animal is unpredictable. She still possessed the routing numbers and the P.O. box access. She could initiate an emergency wire transfer, moving the remaining trust funds into untraceable offshore accounts before a judge could even process a freeze order. She could destroy hard drives and burn documents. I could not give her a single second to prepare a defense. I had to build a quiet, airtight trap. A trap so solid, so legally terrifying, that by the time the steel jaws snapped shut, the escape routes would already be sealed with concrete. I stood up and walked out of the terminal into the warm Hawaiian sun. I took out my phone and bypassed the contacts for the local police department. You do not call patrol officers for a multi-state corporate embezzlement scheme involving complex fiduciary trusts. When you realize your mother is running a felony embezzlement ring in your name, you don't call the police. You hire a forensic accountant. I needed a professional who specialized in the autopsy of fraudulent empires. I needed someone who could trace wire transfers through dummy LLCs and build an evidentiary packet that a federal prosecutor would salivate over. I opened my web browser and searched for independent financial investigators in Honolulu. I scrolled past the flashy corporate firms and looked for boutique operations, the kind of people hired by bitter spouses during high-net-worth divorces to find hidden assets. I found a name: Miriam Vance, former IRS investigator, 30 years of experience tracking phantom money across state lines. The reviews described her as relentless, humorless, and exceptionally expensive. She was exactly what I needed. I walked to my car, tossing my bag onto the passenger seat. I dialed the number listed on Miriam's website. The phone rang twice before a sharp, gravelly voice answered. Vance. I need to hire you, I said. Miriam did not offer pleasantries. What is the scope of the investigation? My parents have been forging my signature to siphon an irrevocable trust for the past decade, I said, keeping my voice flat and even. I have photographic evidence of the original corporate trustee documents and 18 years of forged bank endorsements. The estimated theft exceeds $1.2 million. Silence stretched over the line for 3 long seconds. I heard the distinct sound of a pen clicking open. Are the perpetrators aware that you know? Miriam asked. No, I replied. They think I am completely oblivious. I plan to keep it that way until we lock down the remaining assets. The pen scratched against paper. Good. Emotion makes people sloppy. You have a quiet advantage. Do not lose it. Be at my office tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Bring every piece of documentation you possess. I ended the call. The trap was officially under construction. Brenda thought she controlled the board because she controlled the mail. She was about to discover that the daughter she ignored was meticulously mapping the exits. I drove home and slept for the first time in 3 days, knowing the impending storm would require all my energy. The investigation was quietly accelerating in the background, but Brenda, oblivious to the danger, was already planning her next move to drain the final drops of the trust. And her next attempt would involve a dense stack of legal paper, a glass of iced tea, and the most satisfying spill of my entire life. 2 days after my initial meeting with Miriam Vance, my phone vibrated on my office desk. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. A midday call was an anomaly. A midday call asking me to lunch was unprecedented. Predators do not invite you to a meal unless you are on the menu. "I want to treat my hardworking girl to a nice afternoon," Brenda crooned through the speaker. Her tone dripped with a synthetic, sugary warmth I had not heard since I won a middle school spelling bee. "We have not spent any quality time together lately. Meet me at the Oceanfront Grill near the marina at 1. I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer monitor. My heartbeat remained steady. I knew exactly what this was. Brenda was making her move. I accepted the invitation, injecting my voice with the perfect pitch of surprised gratitude. The restaurant was loud, filled with tourists sunburned from morning snorkeling trips and businessmen conducting casual meetings over seared mahi. Brenda sat at a corner booth overlooking the harbor. She wore a pristine white linen dress and oversized sunglasses pushed back into her hair. A glass of crisp Chardonnay sat in front of her. I slid into the booth and ordered a tall, iced black tea. Condensation immediately began beating on the outside of the glass. Brenda kept the small talk flowing for exactly 14 minutes. She asked about my hours at the resort. She complained about the rising cost of organic produce. She casually mentioned Trevor was looking at purchasing a boat, framing it as a prudent investment in local tourism. I nodded, ate my salad, and waited. When the waiter cleared our plates, the performance shifted. Brenda sighed, a theatrical puff of air meant to signal exhaustion. She reached into her oversized designer tote bag and extracted a thick, stapled stack of legal paper. She set it on the table next to my water glass. "I have a tiny administrative headache I need your help with," she said, offering a tight, closed-mouth smile. "It involves your grandfather's old estate on Maui. There was a minor tax miscalculation when we sold the property. The county needs a signature from all surviving heirs to clear a municipal lien. It is just bureaucratic nonsense, but the accountant is breathing down my neck." She slid the stack across the table. Her manicured finger tapped the bottom of page 40. A single blank line awaited blue ink. "Just sign right here, honey," she said. "I have a pen in my purse." My training as an auditor kicked in. You never, under any circumstance, sign the back page of a contract without reading the headers. I picked up the heavy stack. I did not hold the pen. Instead, I flipped the document over and looked at page 1. Brenda's hand twitched on the table. "Do not bother reading all that legal jargon," she laughed, though the sound was brittle and sharp. "It will just put you to sleep. It is standard municipal code." My eyes scanned the dense text. It was not municipal code. The header did not mention a tax lien or my grandfather's property sale. The bold text at the top of the page read, "Irrevocable beneficiary release and settlement agreement." I kept my face perfectly blank while my mind raced through the paragraphs. Clause 4 jumped out immediately. Waiver of rights upon age of maturity. The document explicitly surrendered all claims, past and future, to the principal corpus of the Sterling Vanguard Trust. I checked the date of maturity listed in the text. It corresponded exactly to my 30th birthday. My 30th birthday was 3 weeks away. The end game suddenly materialized with terrifying clarity. Brenda had forged my signature for 12 years to steal the annual dividends, but the trust was designed to dissolve and disperse the final remaining principal when I turned 30. That final lump sum was sitting in a Delaware account, waiting to trigger. To close an irrevocable trust permanently, a simple forged check endorsement would not suffice. the corporate trustee required a wet ink signature on a liability waiver to authorize the final payout and close the ledger forever. Brenda planned to trick me into signing the release, steal the final $600,000, and sever the paper trail for good. I could not say no. Refusing to sign would instantly broadcast that I understood the document. It would trigger her flight response. But I could not sign it either. I needed to keep this document. It was physical, date-stamped proof of coercion. I looked up at Brenda. She was watching me. Her jaw tense, a predatory gleam in her eyes. I offered a sheepish, compliant smile. "Okay, Mom," I said. "Just point to where you need it." I reached across the table toward the pen she held. As my arm extended, I shifted my elbow 3 inches to the left. My forearm caught the side of the tall glass of iced tea. The heavy glass tipped. Amber liquid and crushed ice flooded across the table, cascading directly over the 40-page document. The iced tea soaked through the thick paper in an instant. The signature line on the back page dissolved into a warped brown puddle. Brenda shrieked. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. She lunged forward, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. She clawed the soaking wet pages away from the spilling ice. The polite, concerned mother vanished, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unvarnished rage. The veins in her neck stood out against her pale skin. "You stupid, clumsy girl," she hissed. Her voice dropped an octave, dripping with venom. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Her knuckles turned white as she clutched the ruined paper. Diners at the adjacent tables stopped eating, turning to stare at the commotion. I shrank back into the booth. I pulled my shoulders inward, widening my eyes, playing the role of the terrified, incompetent daughter she had spent decades cultivating. "I am so sorry," I stammered, my voice trembling perfectly. The glass was sweating. My arms slipped. "I am so clumsy today." Brenda glared at me, her chest heaving. She looked at the soggy, brown-stained document in her hands. The signature line was destroyed. Even if I signed it now, no corporate trustee would accept a warped, illegible legal release. "Let me take it," I pleaded softly. "I will take it to my apartment. I can lay it flat in the sun to dry. I promise I will sign it tonight and bring it to your house first thing in the morning. I am so sorry for messing up your paperwork." Brenda was trapped. If she refused and demanded the wet paper back, her desperation would look highly suspicious over a routine tax form. If she continued to scream, the restaurant manager, who was already walking toward our table with a towel, would intervene. She drew a jagged breath. She forced a stiff, terrifying smile onto her face for the benefit of the approaching waiter. "Fine," Brenda choked out. Her eyes remained locked on mine, cold and dead. "Do not ruin it further. Bring it to me tomorrow." I took the dripping stack of paper from her hands and placed it carefully into my work bag. 30 minutes later, I sat inside my parked car. The engine was off. The cabin was sweltering. I peeled the damp, brown-stained pages apart and laid them across the passenger seat. This ruined waiver was a loaded weapon. It proved Brenda bypassed legal counsel. It proved she tried to coerce a signature under false pretenses. It was the smoking gun Miriam needed to establish intent. But I had a new, urgent problem. The clock was ticking faster than I anticipated. The final disbursement of $600,000 would trigger in 21 days. Brenda was out of time, which meant her next move would be drastic. If I did not return a signed document tomorrow morning, she would panic and attempt to drain the accounts using whatever fraudulent channels she had left. I needed to buy Miriam more time to secure the federal injunction. I needed to give Brenda a crisis so loud, so demanding, and so seemingly disastrous that she would completely forget about the wet paperwork sitting on my passenger seat. I picked up my phone and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. It was time to give my mother exactly what she wanted: a broken, helpless daughter begging for her protection. It was time to invent a Russian hacker. The ruined liability waiver lay drying on my dining table. It was safe, but it was also a ticking bomb. When tomorrow morning arrived, Brenda would expect my signature. When she did not get it, her desperation would turn into action. She possessed the P.O. box and the routing numbers. She could initiate an emergency wire transfer to move the final $600,000 offshore before a judge even looked at my case. I needed to incapacitate her. I needed to wrap her in a crisis so engrossing that she would not check her accounts, would not call the corporate trustee, and would completely forget the deadline she had set for me. I walked into my bathroom and stared at the mirror. I needed to look like a woman whose entire world had just collapsed. I splashed cold water on my face, rubbing my eyes aggressively until the sclera turned bloodshot. I pulled my hair into a messy, uneven knot. I practiced hyperventilating, forcing my chest to heave and my voice to crack. As a child, I had learned to suppress my emotions to survive my mother's indifference. Tonight, I weaponized that suppression in reverse. At 7 o'clock that evening, I parked in the driveway of my parents' house. I left my keys in the ignition and sprinted to the front door. I slammed my fist against the heavy mahogany wood. I did not knock politely. I pounded like a terrified victim seeking refuge. The door swung open. Brenda stood in the foyer wearing an elegant silk robe. Annoyance tightened the corners of her mouth. "Leilani, what on earth is wrong with you?" she snapped. "You are banging like a madwoman. Where is my signed paperwork?" I broke. I let the fake sobs rip through my throat, loud and jagged. I buried my face in my hands, shoulders shaking violently. "It is gone," I wailed between gasping breaths. "It is all gone." Brenda stepped back, startled by the sheer volume of my distress. My father, David, emerged from the living room, a newspaper clutched in his hand. Trevor appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down with mild curiosity. "What is gone?" David asked, his brow furrowing. "My money, my checking account, my identity." I forced out a fresh wave of tears, grabbing Brenda's arm. Her instinct was to pull away, but the theatrics rooted her to the spot. Somebody hacked my bank. I tried to buy groceries after work and my debit card declined. I checked my app and my balance is 0. It is overdrawn. Brenda's eyes narrowed. Hacked. "Yes," I cried, pointing a trembling finger at my phone. "The fraud department at my local bank said someone accessed my social security number. They said the IP address traces back to a server in Russia. They stole everything, my savings, my rent money. They are opening credit lines in my name right now." The shift in Brenda's posture was microscopic, but to an auditor, it was as loud as a siren. The annoyance melted away. The tension in her jaw relaxed. A profound, almost euphoric calm washed over her features. For the past 12 hours, she had been terrified that my spilled iced tea was an act of defiance. She had worried I was getting suspicious. But here I was, a weeping, helpless mess, directing my panic at an invisible, foreign phantom. The red herrings swallowed her fear whole. She felt entirely safe. "Oh, my poor sweet girl," Brenda murmured. Her voice dripped with the synthetic maternal warmth she usually reserved for public gatherings. She wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a stiff embrace. I buried my face against her silk robe, inhaling the sharp scent of her expensive perfume, fighting the overwhelming urge to push her away. "I am so scared, Mom," I whispered against her shoulder. "I do not know what to do. The bank said I have to file a police report immediately or I will be held liable for the debt. Please, you have to come with me to the station. I cannot do this alone." Brenda stroked my hair. The gesture felt rehearsed, devoid of any actual comfort, but it confirmed the hook was set deep. "Of course I will come with you, honey," she said soothingly. "We will handle this together. You just leave everything to me." She turned to David, projecting the image of the capable, protective matriarch. "Grab my purse, David. I need to take Leilani to the precinct. This is going to be a long night. Do not wait up." Trevor scoffed from the staircase. Typical Leilani drama. Probably just clicked a bad link on a scam email. "Try using a secure password next time." Brenda shot him a mild warning look, playing her role perfectly. "Not now, Trevor. Your sister is in crisis." For the next 5 hours, I kept my mother trapped in a small, fluorescent-lit room at the local police precinct. I filed a meticulous, convoluted report about the fabricated Russian hacker. I stumbled over details. I asked the tired desk sergeant repetitive questions. I cried whenever the conversation lulled. Brenda sat beside me the entire time. She held my hand, offering me tissues and looking deeply concerned. She felt powerful. She believed she was managing a disaster, completely blind to the reality that she was the one being managed. While Brenda sat in that sterile room comforting her supposedly ruined daughter, the real investigation moved forward with lethal speed. 3 miles away, in a secure office building, Miriam Vance was working through the night. I had sent her a digital scan of the ruined liability waiver, date-stamped and visibly stained with iced tea. Miriam recognized the urgency immediately. The waiver proved active coercion regarding an imminent trust disbursement. Miriam did not wait for morning. She leveraged her contacts from her days as an IRS investigator. She drafted an emergency ex parte motion, attaching the photographic evidence from my grandfather's floor safe and the corrupted signature pages. She bypassed the local civil courts and routed the petition directly to a federal duty judge. The legal machinery engaged silently. By the time Brenda and I walked out of the police precinct at 2 a.m, the order had been signed. A preliminary injunction was electronically transmitted to Sterling Vanguard Fiduciary Services in Delaware. The directive was absolute. The trust accounts were frozen. No wire transfers, no disbursements, no liquidation of the principal corpus. The final $600,000 was locked in a federal vault. Brenda's access was severed permanently. We stood in the precinct parking lot under the orange glow of a street lamp. I hugged my mother, thanking her profusely for her support. "You are going to be fine, Leilani," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "Identity theft is a nightmare, but we will get it sorted out. Try to get some sleep." I watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing down the dark street. She was heading home to sleep, believing she had successfully pacified me. She thought she still controlled the board. She had no idea that her empire was already dead. The accounts were frozen, the paper trail was secured, and the endgame was locked. But freezing the trust was only a defensive maneuver. To secure a federal indictment, Miriam needed to prove exactly where the stolen money had gone. We needed to map the labyrinth of shell companies Brenda had built to hide her theft. And the key to breaking that labyrinth lay in the one place my mother felt most secure, her own professional career. The sun had barely crested the volcanic ridge when I parked outside the nondescript glass building downtown. I was operating on zero sleep. The adrenaline from the police station charade still buzzed in my veins, but the frantic, weeping daughter I had played the night before was gone. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor and walked into the sterile, hyper-cooled suite. Miriam did not offer coffee or pleasantries. She sat behind a sprawling oak desk flanked by dual computer monitors displaying endless rows of financial data. The walls of her office were lined with whiteboards covered in complex flowcharts, black marker lines connecting names, dates, and account numbers. "Take a seat," she directed, her voice carrying the gravelly texture of a lifelong skeptic. "The federal injunction cleared at 2:14 this morning. Sterling Vanguard has placed a hard lock on the remaining trust principal. Your mother cannot move a single dime." I let out a slow, measured breath. The defensive perimeter was secure. "Now," Miriam continued, tapping a thick file folder on her desk, "we transition to offense. We need to construct the evidentiary chain. Freezing the account stops the bleeding, but to secure a federal indictment, we must prove the exact trajectory of the stolen funds. She turned one of her monitors toward me. We had a glaring logic gap, she explained, pointing a pen at a digitized spreadsheet. Your brother is in his early 30s. He has no verified employment history, no W-2 forms from a legitimate corporation, and no documented skills. Yet, he purchases high-end real estate, luxury vehicles, and designer assets. I nodded. I had questioned that math for years. The Internal Revenue Service utilizes algorithms designed to detect sudden, unexplained wealth, Miriam said. If a perpetually unemployed surf instructor buys a high-rise condo in Waikiki with a cashier's check, the federal systems flag the transaction for an audit. The perpetrators knew this. They needed a mechanism to wash the stolen trust dividends and integrate the cash into the legitimate banking system. Miriam pulled a printed document from the folder and slid it across the desk. It was a copy of a business registration filed with the State Department of Commerce. The entity was named Island Apex Property Holdings Limited Liability Company. Look at the registered agent, Miriam instructed. I traced my finger down the page. The name printed on the state registry was Brenda Kai. Your mother leveraged her active real estate license to legitimize the fraud, Miriam stated flatly. She possessed the industry credentials to establish property management firms without raising immediate suspicion. She created ghost companies. Island Apex Property Holdings has no actual clients. It manages no real buildings. It exists solely on paper. The intricate architecture of their crime began to materialize before my eyes. When the corporate trustee in Delaware mailed your annual dividend to the intercepted post office box, your mother forged your signature, Miriam explained, detailing the life cycle of the stolen cash. She deposited those forged checks directly into the commercial bank accounts of her dummy corporations. Once the money sat inside Island Apex Holdings, it was classified as business revenue. Miriam slid a second document toward me. It was a tax form, a 1099 contractor earnings statement. Island Apex Holdings then hired your brother as an independent property consultant, Miriam said, her tone laced with professional disgust. The shell company issued monthly payroll wires to his personal checking account. Your brother claimed those wires as consulting income and paid standard income tax on the revenue. The brilliance of their scheme sent a chill down my spine. By paying taxes on the stolen money, they effectively cleaned it. The IRS saw a successful young real estate consultant earning a high income. They did not see a family draining an irrevocable trust. By intertwining her professional real estate license with the shell companies, your mother escalated her exposure from simple theft to federal money laundering and wire fraud, Miriam concluded. She jeopardized her entire career to subsidize his lifestyle. Miriam stood up and walked over to a high-capacity laser printer humming in the corner of the room. She retrieved a thick, warm stack of paper and carried it back to the desk. We have successfully traced the most recent dividend, she said, the disbursement issued on your 29th birthday. I looked at the ledger she presented. The trust had released $125,000 last July. The funds had routed through the Delaware trustee, landed in the Island post office box, and traveled through Brenda's shell company. Trace the final wire transfer from Island Apex Holdings, Miriam instructed. The ledger showed an outgoing electronic transfer of $80,000 executed just 3 weeks ago. The recipient institution was listed as Blue Water Marine Brokerage. I stared at the name. A marine brokerage. Your brother put down a cash deposit on a 50-foot luxury catamaran, Miriam confirmed. He purchased a vessel requiring a monthly slip fee larger than your annual rent. He funded the transaction using the exact dividend designated for your 29th year of life. The image of Trevor complaining about the local surf breaks flashed through my mind. He was upgrading his recreational toys while I debated which brand of generic rice I could afford at the grocery store. Miriam aligned the stack of papers, tapping the edges against the desk to square them. She reached for a heavy-duty binder and began threading the documents onto the metal rings. "This is the forensic audit," she announced. The paper snapped into place. It contains the original corporate trustee charter, the change of address fraud, 18 years of forged bank endorsements, the state registry of the shell companies, and the itemized tracking of $1.2 million in stolen assets. She closed the binder. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet office. "The paperwork is flawless," Miriam said, sliding the black binder across the polished oak. "It is a loaded gun. Once this hits a prosecutor's desk, there are no plea deals that keep them out of a federal penitentiary. The preparation phase is concluded." I placed my hands flat against the cold leather cover of the binder. Underneath my palms rested the quantified sum of my stolen life. Every canceled birthday, every dismissed achievement, every grueling night shift I endured while my family lived like royalty. It was all reduced to ink and ledger lines. I did not feel a sudden rush of triumph. I felt a cold, terrifying clarity. For the first time in my life, I possessed true, undeniable leverage. I held the power to utterly dismantle the people who had treated me like a disposable asset. I could strip my mother of her real estate license, seize my brother's condo, and force my father into ruin. The investigation was finished. The weapon was fully assembled and ready to fire. But handing it to the authorities in a quiet, bureaucratic handover felt insufficient. A crime this intimate demanded a reckoning of equal measure. They had spent decades insulting my intelligence, parading their stolen wealth in front of my face while demanding my gratitude. I needed them to understand exactly who ended their reign. I thanked Miriam, took the heavy black binder, and walked out into the blinding mid-morning sun. I placed the audit carefully into the trunk of my car. I needed to see them. I needed to sit across from them, look into their eyes, and measure their complacency. Tomorrow was the first Sunday of the month. My parents were hosting their traditional afternoon barbecue on their expansive back patio. It was an event designed for Brenda to show off her landscaping and for Trevor to boast about his latest acquisitions. I would attend the barbecue. I would eat their food. I would smile and play the role of the dutiful, naive daughter recovering from a traumatic cyber attack. I would stand in the center of their empire, knowing I held the exact coordinates to initiate the airstrike. The smoke from the Kiawe wood grill drifted lazily across the manicured lawn of my parents' backyard. Sunday afternoons at the Kai household were an institution. The air smelled of roasting teriyaki chicken and expensive sunscreen. I parked my 12-year-old sedan on the street behind a row of gleaming luxury SUVs. I grabbed a store-bought potato salad from the passenger seat, took a deep breath, and walked through the side gate into the lion's den. The patio hummed with the noise of extended family and close neighbors. Aunties in bright floral dresses clustered near the patio furniture, fanning themselves and gossiping. Uncles stood in small groups holding cold beers, discussing the rising cost of island real estate. Brenda moved through the crowd like a minor celebrity holding court. She wore a breezy, immaculate white sundress, carrying a tray of sliced papaya. She laughed loudly at a neighbor's joke, the picture of effortless grace. She spotted me near the edge of the lawn. "Leilani," she called out, raising a hand. "You made it." I walked toward her, plastering on the hesitant, fragile smile of a woman still recovering from a devastating financial blow. "How are you holding up, honey?" Brenda asked. Her voice hit the perfect pitch of performative maternal concern. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder, making sure the aunties nearby could hear her. "Did the bank give you any updates on those terrible Russian hackers?" I kept my eyes downcast, nervously shifting the container of potato salad in my hands. "No progress yet," I murmured softly. The fraud department said it could take months to investigate the IP addresses. I am just trying to take it one day at a time. Brenda sighed heavily, patting my arm. It is a tragedy, really. You poor thing. Why don't you go get some food and relax? We will figure it all out. She turned away, satisfied that her decoy was holding firm. I walked toward the food spread, but my attention locked onto the far side of the patio. Trevor stood near the massive, custom-built outdoor kitchen. He wore designer linen shorts and a pair of sunglasses that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He was holding a pair of stainless steel tongs, flipping chicken skewers while holding court with a younger cousin. I walked over and leaned against the granite counter of the outdoor prep station. "Hey, Trevor," I said. He glanced over, offering a brief, dismissive nod. "Leilani, heard about your little cybersecurity disaster. Tough break. Gotta be careful where you swipe your debit card." I nodded, watching the fat sizzle on the grill grates. "Thanks for the advice." Trevor took a sip from a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. He sighed, adjusting his sunglasses. "Honestly, dealing with retail banking is a nightmare for ordinary people. I am lucky I utilize private wealth management firms. They handle the security protocols." He leaned against the counter, warming up to his favorite subject, himself. "People think having significant assets is a breeze," Trevor continued, gesturing broadly with his tongs. "But the stress of wealth management is brutal. The endless paperwork, the tax bracket adjustments, coordinating with the CPAs. It is a full-time job just maintaining the portfolio." He took another sip of his drink, shaking his head. "Sometimes I envy people like you, Leilani. A simple paycheck, a simple life. You do not have to worry about balancing aggressive growth funds against capital gains liabilities. You just clock in and clock out." I looked at him. The scene was drenched in an irony so thick it was almost suffocating. My brother was standing in our parents' backyard, complaining directly to me about the agonizing stress of managing my stolen money. He was lecturing a forensic auditor about the burdens of capital gains, completely unaware that his so-called portfolio was currently locked in a federal freeze initiated by the very woman he was patronizing. I forced my expression to remain perfectly neutral. "I guess I am lucky," I said softly. Trevor chuckled, oblivious to the loaded weapon pointing straight at his head. "Exactly. Enjoy the simple things." I walked away from the grill, carrying a plate of food I had no intention of eating. I navigated toward the shade of a large banyan tree near the edge of the property. As I sat down, I noticed a subtle shift in the social dynamics of the patio. The aunties were glancing in my direction, their voices dropping into hushed whispers. When I made eye contact, they quickly looked away, their faces tight with uncomfortable pity. I watched Brenda lean close to Auntie Melly, a notorious island gossip. Brenda's face was a mask of tragic concern. She shook her head slowly, tapping her temple with one finger. I knew exactly what was happening. My mother sensed a slight, imperceptible shift in my energy during our lunch earlier that week. Even though the Russian hacker story worked perfectly, her predatory instincts registered that I was no longer the totally docile, oblivious girl she required. To insulate herself against any potential fallout, Brenda was launching a preemptive strike. She was running a classic smear campaign. She was poisoning the well, ensuring that if I ever tried to speak out, the community would dismiss my claims as the ravings of a disturbed mind. I sat quietly and watched the contagion spread. I saw Cousin Chemo shake his head sympathetically. I saw an uncle cast a wary glance in my direction. A few minutes later, Auntie Mele approached my chair. She carried a plate of fruit, her expression strained. "Leilani," she said gently, hovering near my seat. "Your mother tells us you have been under a lot of stress lately. She mentioned you were having some paranoid thoughts about your finances. Are you taking care of yourself, sweetie? Did you stop taking your medication?" The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. I had never been prescribed medication for paranoia in my life. Brenda was fabricating a mental health crisis to discredit a forensic auditor. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stand up. I wanted to grab Auntie Melly by the shoulders, shake her, and explain that Brenda was running a felony embezzlement ring. I wanted to march to my car, retrieve the heavy black binder containing the $1.2 million audit, and slam it onto the patio table for everyone to read. I wanted to defend my reputation, but I stopped myself. I took a slow breath, inhaling the smell of the roasting kiawe wood. When the smear campaign hits, do you fight the rumors, or do you smile and let them dig their grave 10 feet deeper? If I fought back now, I would seem exactly like the unhinged, defensive daughter Brenda was portraying me to be. More importantly, it would alert Brenda that her narrative was failing. The trap required their absolute, unquestioning complacency. They needed to feel completely victorious. I looked up at Auntie Melly. I let my shoulders slump forward, creating an exaggerated posture of defeat. I widened my eyes and allowed my bottom lip to tremble slightly. "It has just been really hard lately, Auntie," I whispered, my voice intentionally fragile. "I am trying to keep it together, but my mind plays tricks on me. I just need rest." Auntie Melly sighed, patting my hand with deep, condescending sympathy. "You listen to your mother, Leilani. She knows what is best for you." She walked back to the group of gossiping relatives, eager to confirm Brenda's diagnosis. I watched Brenda observe the interaction from across the yard. When Auntie Melly nodded to her, Brenda's shoulders relaxed completely. A tiny, triumphant smirk touched the corner of her lips. She had successfully isolated me from the entire extended family. She believed she had sterilized the environment. I sat in the shade of the banyan tree, savoring the cool breeze coming off the ocean. My mother had just weaponized our community against me. My brother was planning his next yacht excursion using my stolen dividends. My father was turning a blind eye to the entire operation. They felt invincible. They had no idea that a federal prosecutor was currently reviewing a finalized financial audit detailing their 18-year criminal conspiracy. They had no idea their bank accounts were already frozen. I finished my glass of water, stood up, and quietly exited the barbecue. I did not say goodbye. I walked down the street to my car, the silence of the afternoon ringing in my ears. The psychological warfare was over. The battlefield was set. Now I needed the perfect venue to execute the strike. I needed an event so public, so drenched in manufactured prestige, that the fallout would be inescapable. And Trevor, in his infinite arrogance, was about to hand me the ultimate stage. He was planning a celebration that would require a very specific guest list and a very specialized delivery service. The invitation arrived in the mail printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock that felt distressingly familiar. My brother Trevor was officially engaged to Harper Sterling. Harper was the heiress to a local banking dynasty. She was polished, educated, and genuinely kind. She spent her weekends volunteering at marine conservation nonprofits, entirely oblivious to the fact that her new fiancé was financing his life through an 18-year felony embezzlement scheme. The engagement party was scheduled for the second Saturday in July. The venue was the most exclusive beachfront country club on the island. I checked the calendar on my phone. The second Saturday in July was July 14th, my 30th birthday, the date my trust fund was supposed to reach final maturity and dissolve, the exact day my parents had erased from existence for nearly 2 decades. And now they were throwing a lavish, catered event to celebrate Trevor's upward mobility on the very day I was born. The audacity was no longer surprising. It was architectural. Before I could even decide how to respond to the invitation, my phone buzzed. A text message from Brenda lit up the screen. "Hi, honey. Just wanted to talk about the engagement party next week. Your father and I have been discussing it, and given your recent mental health struggles and the paranoia you have been dealing with, we think a loud, crowded party might be too overwhelming for you right now. We want to protect you. We think it is best if you sit this one out so you do not cast a shadow on Trevor's big day. Hope you understand. Love, Mom. I stared at the glowing text. Brenda was using the fake paranoia she invented at the barbecue to officially uninvite me from my own brother's engagement party. She wanted to ensure the messy, financially ruined daughter was nowhere near the wealthy Sterling family when the champagne popped. I typed a 2-word reply. I understand. I set the phone down. Brenda thought she was locking me out of the castle. She had no idea she was handing me the keys to the armory. If I was not going to be at the party, I could not detonate the forensic audit in person. I needed an inside man. I needed someone within the venue who possessed the authority and the social standing to ensure Brenda and Trevor could not sweep the fallout under the rug when the paper trail hit the table. I needed the Sterling family. I pulled out my laptop and researched Harper's father, Marcus Sterling. He was the executive vice president of commercial lending for the largest bank in Hawaii. He spent his days evaluating risk, scrutinizing ledgers, and protecting his institution from financial fraud. He was exactly the kind of man who would appreciate a flawlessly executed forensic audit. The next morning, I called the executive offices of Sterling Commercial Bank. I bypassed the receptionist by using my credentials as the senior financial auditor for my resort. I requested a confidential 30-minute meeting with Marcus Sterling regarding a significant liability exposure involving his immediate family. The gravity of the phrasing worked. My meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock that afternoon. I drove downtown, parked in the subterranean garage, and carried the heavy black binder up to the executive suite. Marcus Sterling's office overlooked the harbor. He sat behind a massive glass desk, looking skeptical and impatient. Harper sat on a leather sofa near the window. I had requested she be present. She looked confused, holding a cup of herbal tea. "Ms. Kai," Marcus began, steepling his fingers, "your assistant indicated a matter of urgent financial liability regarding my daughter's engagement. I am a busy man. Please be brief." I did not offer pleasantries. I walked directly to the glass desk and placed the heavy black binder on the surface. The thud echoed in the spacious office. "My brother, Trevor, is entirely unemployed," I said, keeping my voice flat and analytical. "He possesses no verified income, no legitimate W-2 history, and no marketable skills. Yet he recently purchased a high-rise condo in Waikiki and put down a deposit on a luxury catamaran." Harper shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. "Leilani, Trevor works in property management consulting. He told us his firm is highly successful." I turned to Harper. "The firm is called Island Apex Property Holdings. It is a ghost company created by my mother, Brenda, using her real estate license. The company manages no properties. It has 0 clients. It exists solely to issue fake payroll wires to your fiancé to clean stolen money." Marcus lowered his hands. The impatience vanished from his face, replaced by the sharp, focused intensity of a veteran banker. "What stolen money?" I opened the black binder. I flipped past the title page and pointed to the original corporate trustee documents. 18 years ago, my grandfather established an irrevocable trust in my name, I explained, tracing the routing numbers with my finger. The initial principal was $1.8 million. For the past 12 years, my mother has intercepted the mail, forged my signature on the annual dividend checks, and funneled the cash through the shell LLCs to subsidize Trevor's lifestyle. Harper gasped softly, setting her teacup down on the side table. Marcus Sterling leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents. He did not immediately defend his prospective son-in-law. He did not ask if I was prone to paranoia. He looked at the math. I turned the pages, revealing the photographic evidence of the forged signatures, the state registry of the shell companies, and the itemized tracking of the stolen funds. The paperwork traces $1.2 million directly from my trust to Trevor's personal accounts, I said. We have secured a federal injunction freezing the remaining principal. A grand jury subpoena is currently being drafted by the district attorney. My family is facing imminent federal indictment for wire fraud and money laundering. I step back from the desk, letting the silence fill the room. I am showing you this because my mother uninvited me from the engagement party to protect your family from my supposed mental instability, I continued. I wanted you to know exactly who your daughter is preparing to marry before the federal marshals start seizing assets. Harper stood up. She walked over to the desk and looked down at the forged signatures. Her face was pale, but her expression was not heartbroken. It was furious. He told me he was self-made, she whispered. He told me he built his portfolio from the ground up. He built it on a stolen identity, Marcus said softly. His voice carried the lethal calm of a man calculating a massive course correction. Marcus closed the binder. He looked up at me. His eyes were cold, assessing, and surprisingly respectful. The paper trail is flawless, Ms. Kai, Marcus said. As a banker, I admire the forensic clarity. As a father, I am deeply enraged. He stood up and walked over to his daughter. He placed a hand on her shoulder. We are canceling the wedding immediately. I will handle the venue deposits. Wait, I said. Marcus turned, raising an eyebrow. I do not want you to cancel the party, I said. My voice was steady, mapping out the architecture of the final strike. If you cancel the event now, Brenda and Trevor will realize something is wrong. They will scatter. They will attempt to liquidate whatever physical assets they still control before the indictments drop. What are you proposing? Harper asked, her voice steadying. I am preparing 10 identical dossiers containing this exact forensic evidence, I explained. I have hired a bonded courier service. They are instructed to deliver these dossiers to my parents, my brother, and the key elders of our extended family. I need them all gathered in one room, surrounded by their peers, where they cannot run, hide, or spin a false narrative. I looked at Marcus Sterling. I need you to host the engagement party. A slow, terrifying smile spread across the bank executive's face, the kind of smile a shark gives right before it strikes. He looked at his daughter. Harper's eyes narrowed. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. You want to utilize my country club event to execute a public financial assassination? Marcus stated. Yes, I replied. Consider the venue secured, Marcus said, extending his hand across the glass desk. The Sterling family will gladly host the execution. We will ensure every prominent member of your extended family is seated in the front row. We will serve vintage champagne while your brother's empire burns to the ground. I shook his hand. The grip was firm and absolute. The alliance was forged. Brenda thought she had successfully removed me from the equation. She thought the engagement party would be the crowning achievement of her social climbing career. She had no idea that the wealthy banker she was so desperate to impress was currently financing the stage for her total destruction. I walked out of the bank and into the bright Honolulu afternoon. The preparation was officially complete. The dossiers were printing. The couriers were hired. The inside man was secured. Now, all I had to do was wait for my 30th birthday to arrive and watch the tracking notification change from out for delivery to delivered. The morning of July 14th dawned clear and bright over the Ko'olau Mountains. I stood on the small concrete lanai of my apartment, gripping a mug of dark roast coffee. For 18 years, this date was a black hole on the calendar. I was conditioned to wake up, swallow the bitter taste of being forgotten, and move through the hours like a ghost haunting my own life. I used to spend this day hoping for a text message, a passing comment, any meager scrap of acknowledgement from the people who raised me. Today, the silence felt different. It did not feel like an absence. It felt like architecture. I turned away from the railing and walked back inside. The small dining table in my living room was clear of clutter, serving as a staging ground. Spread across the polished wood were 10 identical, heavy black envelopes. They were crafted from dense cardstock, the kind used for high-end wedding invitations or executive board summons. Inside each envelope sat the sum total of my family's ruin. Page 1 was a formal notice of the federal injunction, complete with the docket number and the seal of the district court. Page 2 was the summarized forensic audit, tracing the $1.2 million from the Sterling Vanguard Trust directly into the ghost LLCs and out to Trevor's luxury accounts. Page 3 was a blown-up, high-resolution, side-by-side comparison of Brenda's arrogant looping forgery next to my actual signature. And tucked securely behind the signature analysis was a high-quality color scan of the ruined, brown-stained liability waiver, the physical proof of coercion, soaked in iced tea, demonstrating exactly how far my mother was willing to go to drain the final $600,000 before this very day arrived. I picked up a stick of red sealing wax and held it over a small candle flame. The wax melted, dripping thick and hot onto the flap of the first envelope. I pressed a brass stamp into the cooling puddle, leaving behind a sharp geometric imprint. I repeated the process 9 more times. The repetitive mechanical motion was soothing. I was not operating on anger anymore. Anger is chaotic. Anger makes you sloppy. I was operating on precision. I arranged the 10 sealed envelopes into a neat stack. They carried physical weight, dense and undeniable. I was not going to crash the engagement party tonight. I was not going to storm through the double doors of the country club, tearfully confront my parents, and demand justice while the island elite watched. Brenda thrived on emotional chaos. If I showed up screaming, she would instantly slip into her practiced role of the victimized, exhausted mother dealing with a mentally unstable daughter. She would use my volume to validate her smear campaign. The aunties would nod in sympathy, and my righteous fury would be dismissed as a psychiatric episode. I refused to give her the comfort of a scene she could manipulate. I would strike them with the cold, inescapable gravity of paper. You cannot gaslight a forensic ledger. You cannot outscream a federal subpoena. I checked my watch, 9 in the morning. I had the entire day to myself. I drove to a local bakery in Kaimuki. I did not buy a vanilla cake. I ordered a single, massive slice of bright pink lilikoi passion fruit cake, vibrant and tart. I ate it sitting on the hood of my car overlooking the ocean, watching the surfers navigate the morning swell. I treated myself to a new dress, something sharp and emerald green that fit perfectly. I bought expensive Kona coffee. I celebrated the 30th year of my life by savoring the total, unbroken peace of my own company. At 5 o'clock in the evening, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. A calendar alert blinked on the screen. The engagement party was officially beginning. I opened a specialized logistics application on my phone. A map of Honolulu filled the screen. A blue digital pin blinked near the industrial district near the airport. The bonded courier service I hired was mobilizing. The couriers were instructed to hold position until exactly 7:25. The timing was critical. Marcus Sterling had provided me with the detailed itinerary for the evening. At 7:30, the waitstaff would pour the vintage champagne. Trevor was scheduled to stand up and deliver his toast, officially welcoming the Sterling family into his empire. The couriers would arrive exactly as the glasses were raised. I sat on my sofa, watching the blue dot inch slowly across the digital map. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The anticipation building in my chest was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not fear. It was the terrifying thrill of a predator watching the trap mechanism engage. Revenge isn't a screaming match in a crowded room. Revenge is watching a FedEx tracking notification change from out for delivery to delivered. What is the coldest thing you have ever done to protect your peace? I watched the blue dot navigate the dense traffic on the H1 freeway. It passed the exit for my parents' neighborhood. It merged onto the coastal highway heading toward the exclusive country club district. I imagined Brenda at that exact moment. She was likely wearing a designer gown purchased with my stolen dividends, smiling brightly, clutching a glass of champagne, and congratulating herself on a flawless victory. She believed she had successfully isolated the problem child and secured her golden son's future. The blue dot on the screen turned onto the private access road leading to the country club. It was 7:22. I set the phone down on the table, the screen still glowing brightly in the dimming apartment. The logistical preparation was complete. The mechanism was in motion. There was nothing left for me to do but wait for the inevitable shockwave to reach my balcony. But while I sat in the quiet safety of my apartment, miles away, the heavy oak doors of the country club ballroom were swinging open. And the three men in matching charcoal uniforms stepping through those doors were about to dismantle 18 years of carefully constructed lies in less than 60 seconds. The digital blue pin on my phone screen stopped moving. It hovered directly over the coordinates for the Diamond Head Country Club. Harper Sterling recounted the exact sequence of events to me the following afternoon. She described the scene frame by frame, offering the precise clinical detail of a bank executive's daughter. I sat on my sofa in the dark, watching the map, imagining the architecture of my family's ruin unfolding miles away. At 7:28, the ballroom glowed under the warm light of crystal chandeliers. Wait staff wearing crisp white uniforms glided between circular tables, pouring a $200 vintage reserve into long stem flutes. The room smelled of roasted macadamia nuts, expensive floral arrangements, and salt air drifting through the open terrace doors. At the primary VIP table, my brother Trevor stood up. He wore a bespoke navy suit funded entirely by the dividends meant for my 19th year of life. He held a silver fork, tapping it gently against the rim of his crystal flute. The sharp, clear ringing silenced the murmuring crowd of island elite, banking executives, and extended relatives. Trevor offered a practiced, humble smile. He looked out over the sea of guests, locking eyes with Marcus Sterling, who sat at the adjacent table. Marcus returned the gaze with a calm, unreadable expression, his hands folded neatly over his linen napkin. "Building a legacy is never a solitary endeavor," Trevor began, his voice carrying smoothly through the ballroom acoustics. "They say self-made men are a myth. I used to disagree. I used to think my portfolio, my firm, and my success were built solely by my own two hands." Harper sat beside him, staring straight ahead, sipping her sparkling water. She did not look at her fiancé. Trevor pressed a hand over his heart. "But looking around this room tonight, I realize my foundation was laid by my parents. They taught me the value of hard work. They taught me to never take shortcuts." At the center of the VIP table, Brenda brought a tissue to the corner of her eye. She wore an emerald gown beaming with radiant, unfiltered pride. David sat next to her, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the quiet, steadfast patriarch. The surrounding aunties murmured in approval, touched by the golden sun's touching tribute. The digital clock on Marcus Sterling's wristwatch turned to 7:30. The heavy oak double doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open. Three men stepped over the threshold. They did not wear tuxedos. They wore matching charcoal gray tactical uniforms. They did not pause at the host stand to check the seating chart. They walked with the heavy, synchronized stride of former military personnel, their thick boots echoing against the polished marble floor. The rhythmic thud of their footsteps cut through the soft, ambient music playing over the speakers. Guests sitting near the entrance turned their heads, their polite conversations fading into confused whispers. Trevor paused his speech. His smile faltered slightly as he watched the three men march directly down the center aisle, bypassing the sprawling buffet and the ice sculpture. The men did not care about the bespoke suits or the ocean view. They fanned out with mechanical precision as they reached the front of the room. One man stopped beside David. One stopped beside Trevor. The lead agent halted directly behind Brenda's chair. The lead agent carried a stack of dense, heavy black parcels. The red wax seals gleamed under the chandelier light. He placed one envelope on the tablecloth in front of Brenda. He moved to the next seat and placed one in front of the eldest uncle. His partners mirrored the action, dropping the black cardstock onto the pristine white linen in front of David and Trevor. "What is this?" Trevor asked, lowering his champagne flute. He let out a nervous, breathy laugh, looking down at Harper. "Did you buy me a watch early?" Harper did not smile. She did not answer. "Legal service," the lead agent announced. His voice was flat, projecting easily across the sudden quiet of the front tables. Signature required for proof of delivery. He unclipped a digital stylus from his tablet and held it out to Brenda. Brenda looked annoyed by the interruption. She shot an apologetic glance toward Marcus Sterling, silently asking for forgiveness regarding the logistical hiccup. She snatched the stylus from the agent's hand and scribbled her name onto the digital screen. She used the same arrogant, looping cursive she had used for 18 years. The agents collected their signatures, turned on their heels, and marched back down the center aisle. The heavy oak doors shut behind them with a definitive thud. The ballroom hovered in a state of suspended animation. The aunties whispered behind their hands. Trevor set his crystal flute on the table. He picked up the black parcel. Brenda did the same, running her manicured thumbnail under the red wax seal. The wax cracked. Small crimson flakes scattered across the white tablecloth. Brenda reached inside and pulled out the thick stack of premium paper. She stared at the first page. The header bore the official seal of the United States District Court. Her eyes scanned the bold text. Emergency ex parte injunction. Asset freeze order. Sterling Vanguard Fiduciary Services. The annoyance on her face shifted into a rigid, breathless confusion. She did not understand what she was looking at. She thought it was a prank, a convoluted mistake made by a rival real estate firm. Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped to the second page. The forensic audit stared back at her. The flowchart was printed in sharp black ink. It detailed the exact routing numbers of her dummy corporation, Island Apex Property Holdings Limited Liability Company. It showed the incoming deposits from Delaware and the outgoing payroll wires to her son. The color drained from Brenda's face. The radiant flush of pride evaporated, leaving behind a sickly, translucent pallor. Her breathing turned shallow. She turned to the third page. Printed in high-resolution color was a side-by-side photographic comparison. On the left was the authorized signature card from the original trust charter. On the right was the endorsement line of a $60,000 check. The arrogant, looping letters of her own handwriting magnified for the entire world to see. And tucked directly beneath that photograph was the scanned copy of the liability waiver she had tried to force me to sign. The bottom edge was warped and stained brown from spilled iced tea. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. The quiet, obedient daughter who swept the lanai and worked diner shifts had not spilled that drink by accident. The fragile, weeping girl at the police station was a fabrication. Her daughter had spent months building a guillotine, and the blade had just dropped. Brenda's hands began to shake uncontrollably. The thick stack of paper slipped from her grip, scattering across her dinner plate. Her right hand struck the stem of her champagne flute. The tall crystal glass tipped sideways, rolling off the edge of the table. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 100 glittering shards. The sharp crash echoed like a gunshot in the silent ballroom. Brenda opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, a guttural, primal scream tore through her throat. It was the sound of a cornered animal, the raw noise of an empire collapsing into dust. Her knees buckled. Her chair tipped backward. Brenda dropped to the floor, her emerald gown pooling around her on the marble. She fell onto her hands and knees amidst the broken crystal, clutching the scattered pages of the forensic audit to her chest, trying desperately to hide the ink. She gasped for air, hyperventilating, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her face. No one moved to help her. David sat frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the federal injunction sitting on his own plate. The family elders at the surrounding tables opened their envelopes, their eyes widening as they read the explicit details of the theft. The paper trail had detonated perfectly. Trevor looked down at the ruined, shrieking woman on the floor. He looked at the paperwork in his own hands. The smug, self-made narrative he had just sold to the room was dead. He turned his panicked gaze toward his wealthy fiancée, searching for a lifeline, unaware that the real trap was about to spring from the seat right beside him. The wailing from the floor was the only sound in the cavernous room. Brenda knelt among the shattered champagne glass, hyperventilating, trying to crush the itemized forensic ledger against her chest as if physical pressure could erase the ink. Trevor's face drained of all color. The bronze, sun-kissed complexion he maintained through endless surfing trips faded into a sickly, chalky white. His hands trembled so violently that the black cardstock of the envelope rattled against the edge of the table. He stared at the blown-up photograph of his mother's forgery. He stared at the corporate routing numbers linking his consulting income to an offshore ghost account. He dropped the papers. He turned sharply to his right, grasping for the one anchor he believed could still save him. He reached out to grab Harper's hand. "Harper, listen to me," Trevor choked out, his voice high and thin, stripped of all its former bravado. "It is a mistake. It is a malicious smear campaign. Leilani has been having psychiatric episodes. She is disturbed. My mother was just trying to protect me. I can explain the accounting." Harper did not flinch. She did not recoil in horror. She did not burst into tears, and she did not look at him with confusion. She looked at him with absolute, clinical disgust. She slowly pulled her hand back, sliding her fingers away from his desperate grip. She reached down, picked up her designer clutch purse, and snapped the brass clasp shut. The sharp, metallic click cut through Trevor's panicked rambling. "You do not need to explain the accounting to me, Trevor," Harper said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of any emotional hysterics. "I saw the original ledger 3 days ago. My father and I financed this entire party specifically so your sister could deliver the subpoenas while you were surrounded by your peers." Trevor stopped breathing. His jaw went slack. The realization that he had not just been exposed, but actively hunted by his own prospective bride caused his eyes to widen in genuine horror. Harper turned away from him. She looked across the adjacent table and offered a single, sharp nod. Marcus Sterling stood up. The executive vice president of commercial lending did not shout. He did not need to. When a man who controls hundreds of millions of dollars in regional capital stands up in a room full of local business owners, the room listens. Marcus adjusted the lapels of his custom suit. He surveyed the chaotic VIP tables, looking down at Brenda writhing on the floor, at David sitting paralyzed in his chair, and finally at Trevor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced. His voice resonated with the heavy, unyielding authority of a bank vault closing. "It appears the groom's portfolio was built entirely on a stolen identity and 18 years of wire fraud. The Sterling family does not associate with felons." Marcus looked at Trevor one last time. "The engagement is terminated, effective immediately." He offered his arm to his daughter. Harper took it without looking back. Together, they walked past the stunned waiters, past the untouched seafood buffet, and out through the heavy oak doors, leaving the Kai family isolated in the center of their own destruction. The departure of the island's most prominent banking family broke the spell holding the room hostage. Absolute chaos erupted. The smear campaign Brenda had spent weeks carefully cultivating evaporated in seconds. You cannot whisper that your daughter is paranoid when a respected financial executive publicly confirms a federal indictment based on an itemized bank ledger. The aunties and uncles sitting at the surrounding tables ripped open their own black envelopes. The rustle of heavy cardstock filled the air. Gasps of shock echoed as the extended family read the explicit details of the embezzlement. They saw the amounts. They saw the dates. They saw the forged signature that had funded Trevor's luxury condo while Leilani worked night shifts. David finally broke out of his paralysis. He scrambled to his feet, lunging toward the closest table of relatives. "Give me those," David shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He reached out to snatch the forensic audit from his older brother's hands. "It is private family business. You do not understand the whole story. Brenda was just trying to manage things." His older brother, a retired mechanic with hands the size of dinner plates, stood up and shoved David backward. The force of the push sent David stumbling into an empty chair. "You stole from your own blood," the uncle roared, his face flushed with fury. "You let that girl scrub floors while you bought this clown a yacht. Do not touch me, David. Do not ever speak to me again." The social ecosystem of the Kai family collapsed in real time. Guests began standing up, throwing their napkins onto their plates, and walking toward the exits. No one offered to help Brenda off the floor. No one patted Trevor on the shoulder. They fled the ballroom as if the air itself had become toxic. Miles away, on the quiet balcony of my apartment, I sat cross-legged on a lounge chair, listening to the gentle crash of the ocean waves against the shoreline. My phone sat on the small glass table beside me. The screen lit up continuously, a silent strobe light in the tropical darkness. The notifications flooded in. Missed call from Trevor. Missed call from Trevor. Voicemail received. Missed call from David. Missed call from Brenda. Text message from Auntie Melly. Missed call from Trevor. I picked up the device and tapped the voicemail icon. I did not intend to reply, but I wanted to hear the sound of the architecture falling. I pressed play on the first message from Trevor. "Leilani, please," he hyperventilated into the receiver, the background noise filled with shouting and breaking glass. "You have to call off the lawyers. Harper left. Her dad canceled everything. Mom is having a breakdown. I will give you the condo. I will sign over the boat. Just stop the federal freeze. Please, Lainey, you are ruining my life." I deleted the message. He still thought this was a negotiation. He still thought he possessed leverage. I played the next message. It was David. "Leilani, honey, it is Dad." His voice wavered, thick with tears. "The family is leaving. Everyone saw the papers. Your mother is inconsolable. We were just trying to do what was best for the family unit. We were going to tell you about the trust eventually. You have to believe me. Please pick up the phone." I deleted the message. He was still trying to play the passive, well-intentioned patriarch. I watched the screen as 40 missed calls registered over the span of 20 minutes. 18 years of forgotten birthdays. 18 years of sitting alone while they sang to the Golden Child. 18 years of being told I was a financial burden while they drained a fortune with my forged name. The silence I had endured for nearly 2 decades was finally being repaid. I had answered their 18-year erasure with a single, devastating 10-minute window. I turned my phone on silent, slid it into my pocket, and leaned my head back against the chair. The stars were beginning to emerge through the coastal cloud cover. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel the sudden, euphoric high that movies promised. I felt empty, but it was a clean, sanitized emptiness. It was the feeling of a surgeon who had just successfully excised a massive necrotic tumor. The operation was bloody, the patient was screaming, but the poison was finally gone. The ambush at the country club was only the beginning. The public humiliation stripped them of their social armor, but the real punishment was about to arrive via certified mail. Tomorrow morning, the federal machinery would awaken, And the consequences waiting for Brenda and Trevor were far worse than losing a country club membership. The Monday morning following the engagement party arrived with the sterile, unforgiving efficiency of a federal bureaucracy. The dramatic theatrics of the country club were over. Now the cold machinery of justice began to grind. Miriam Vance did not waste time with local police precincts. At exactly 8 in the morning, she walked into the downtown office of the United States Attorney and submitted the finalized $1.2 million forensic audit. Because the stolen dividends had crossed state lines, from the corporate trustee in Delaware to the ghost LLCs in Hawaii, the jurisdiction immediately escalated to federal wire fraud. By noon, 2 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation knocked on the front door of my parents' house. They did not carry black envelopes. They carried search warrants. The legal and social fallout crashed down upon my family with brutal, synchronized force. Brenda's entire identity was constructed around her status as a prominent island real estate agent. She attended charity galas, hosted open houses in exclusive neighborhoods, and leveraged her professional network to maintain the illusion of her wealth. She obsessed over property values and municipal zoning codes. That obsession became the exact instrument of her destruction. Because Brenda had utilized her active real estate license to register the dummy corporations, she triggered an immediate mandatory review by the state licensing board. The board did not wait for a criminal conviction. The presence of her signature on the Shell LLC charters, directly linked to a frozen federal trust, was sufficient evidence of gross professional misconduct. On Wednesday afternoon, the state permanently revoked Brenda's real estate license. She was barred from ever practicing again. Her agency quietly removed her headshot from their website. Her pending escrow accounts were reassigned. The career she had weaponized to launder my stolen trust fund was vaporized in 48 hours. Poetic justice possesses a unique, devastating elegance when it forces the abuser to swallow their own poison. The collapse of her professional life accelerated her social exile. In a tight-knit island community, reputation functions as currency. Once your currency is counterfeit, you become a ghost. The aunties and uncles who had gathered at the Sunday barbecue, the same relatives who had whispered about my fabricated paranoia, now treated my parents like a biohazard. Brenda was removed from her country club committees. David's substitute teaching contracts were mysteriously canceled by the local school district. When Brenda walked into her usual upscale grocery store, former friends abruptly turned down different aisles to avoid making eye contact. The isolation Brenda had so carefully engineered for me over 18 years was now her own permanent, inescapable cage. The pressure of the federal investigation and the total social quarantine fractured the family unit. There is no loyalty among thieves when the federal marshals start inventorying assets. The first crack appeared on a Friday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing the preliminary restitution filings from Miriam when my phone screen lit up. It was David. I did not answer, letting the call roll to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a notification popped up. I tapped the audio file. "Leilani, please," David began. His voice was no longer the calm, passive tone of a man pretending everything was fine. It was thin, reedy, and frantic. He sounded like a man drowning. "The feds were here again today. They are talking about mandatory minimum sentencing. They are talking about asset forfeiture for the house." He paused, taking a ragged breath. The silence on the recording stretched tight. "I did not know the full extent of what your mother was doing," he pleaded. "I swear to you, Lonnie, Brenda handled all the mail. Brenda set up the companies. I just went along with it to keep the peace in the house." You know how she gets. I was scared of her, too. The cowardice was staggering. He had stood in the kitchen watching Trevor eat a vanilla cake while I swept the lanai. He had watched Brenda hand me the tea-stained liability waiver. He was a willing, complicit beneficiary of the theft. And now he was attempting to rewrite history to save his own skin. Leilani, David whispered, his voice dropping to a desperate hush. I told my lawyer I am willing to cooperate. I will testify against Brenda. I will tell the prosecutor everything about how she forged the signatures if you agree to ask the judge for leniency on my behalf. Please, Lonnie. I am your father. Do not let them send me to prison for her mistakes. I deleted the voicemail. The betrayal was absolute. David was offering to sell his wife to a federal prosecutor in exchange for a lighter sentence. The facade of the loving, unified family had shattered into a frantic scramble for self-preservation. Their love had always been transactional, and now the accounts were overdrawn. While my parents cannibalized each other, my phone began to fill with a different kind of message. The extended family members who had blindly consumed Brenda's smear campaign realized they had backed the wrong horse. The aunties who had looked at me with pitying eyes at the barbecue started sending long, sprawling text messages. "Oh my God, Leilani, we had no idea. We are so horrified by what Brenda did. Sweetie, please forgive us for believing her lies. We love you. Let us take you to dinner to make up for this. You must be so traumatized. We are here for you now." I read the messages. I did not reply to a single one. When you are the scapegoat, the forgotten child, the community often demands that you perform gratitude when they finally acknowledge your abuse. They expect you to eagerly welcome them back into your life, eager to absorb their apologies and validate their sudden moral awakening. But I was an auditor. I understood the value of a closed ledger. These relatives had watched Brenda isolate me. They had watched Trevor drive luxury cars while I wore thrift store clothes. They had eagerly participated in the whispered rumors about my mental health without ever once calling me to ask for my side of the story. Silence protects the abuser. Complicity is an active choice. I did not owe them forgiveness. I did not owe them absolution to make them feel better about their own failure to protect a child in their community. I opened the settings on my phone. I selected Auntie Melee's contact profile. I tapped the block caller button. I moved down the list, systematically blocking every single relative who had sent an apology text. I severed the digital connections with the same cold precision Miriam used to sever the offshore bank accounts. I refused to grant them access to my newly reclaimed life. The cleanup phase was brutal, bureaucratic, and entirely devoid of the cinematic closure people expect from family trauma. There were no tearful reunions. There were no final dramatic speeches on a courthouse steps. There was only the slow, methodical process of liquidating an empire built on stolen ground. And as the federal prosecutors prepared the indictments, the court turned its attention to restitution. I was about to recover the massive fortune my grandparents had left me. But the true payoff was not going to be the zeros hitting my bank account. The ultimate satisfaction was going to arrive 6 months later, in the driveway of the resort where I worked, involving a man who thought he was destined for a yacht. The federal court did not share Brenda's flair for dramatic delays. The restitution order was handed down with a swift, administrative brutality that stripped my family of every luxury they had stolen over the past 18 years. Because Brenda and David could not produce the $1.2 million they had laundered and spent, the judge authorized an immediate asset forfeiture protocol. The family house was seized and placed on the market. The high-end vehicles were towed away by federal marshals on a rainy Tuesday morning. Brenda's remaining jewelry, purchased with the dividends from my early 20s, was cataloged and auctioned. Trevor's manufactured empire collapsed the hardest. The ghost LLCs were formally dissolved by the state. The luxury catamaran he had bragged about was repossessed before it ever left the marina dock. Unable to pay the staggering HOA fees without the stolen payroll wires, Trevor defaulted on his Waikiki high-rise. The bank foreclosed on the condo in a matter of weeks, plunging my brother into absolute, unmitigated personal bankruptcy. The funds generated from the liquidations, combined with the final $600,000 secured by Miriam's federal injunction, were routed directly into a secure, newly established trust under my sole control. I did not gloat. I did not drive past their foreclosed house to watch them pack moving boxes. I focused entirely on the architecture of my new life. With the reclaimed funds, I purchased a secluded property on the north shore of Oahu. It was far away from the manicured, gossipy neighborhoods of Honolulu. The house sat on a slight elevation, surrounded by dense, towering Norfolk pines, offering a sweeping, unobstructed view of the Pacific Ocean. It was quiet. It was pristine. It was funded by the fierce self-advocacy of a woman who refused to remain a ghost. I spent my evenings painting the walls, replacing the hardware, and organizing the sprawling kitchen. I was building a fortress of peace, one room at a time. But the universe has a distinct, razor-sharp sense of humor. The ultimate payoff for the 18 years of erasure did not arrive in a courtroom. It arrived 6 months after the engagement party, on the heated asphalt driveway of the luxury resort where I worked. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished finalizing a complex quarterly audit for the resort's food and beverage division. I closed my laptop, packed my briefcase, and took the elevator down to the main lobby. I walked out through the sliding glass doors into the blinding afternoon sun. I pulled a small laminated ticket from my wallet and handed it to the valet stand. I had recently upgraded my transportation. I had traded in my sputtering 12-year-old sedan for a sleek, brand-new electric SUV. It was a quiet, sensible luxury, purchased in cash. The valet manager nodded, taking my ticket. He spoke into his radio headset, dispatching a driver to retrieve the vehicle from the subterranean garage. I stood under the shade of the Grand Porte Cochere, checking my emails while I waited. 2 minutes later, the silent, smooth hum of the electric engine approached. The dark SUV pulled up to the curb, tires stopping perfectly parallel to the red-painted line. The driver shifted the car into park. He opened the door and stepped out onto the hot asphalt. He wore the standard uniform required by the resort's subcontracted valet company: stiff black polyester shorts, a sweat-stained white polo shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat to block the harsh tropical sun. A plastic name tag was pinned crookedly to his chest. The driver jogged around the front of the vehicle to open the passenger side door for me. He reached for the chrome handle, pulling the heavy door open. "Here you go, ma'am," he said, his voice flat and exhausted. "Have a wonderful." He stopped mid-sentence. I looked up from my phone. Standing 3 feet away from me, wearing a sweat-stained polyester uniform, was my brother, Trevor, the golden child who had driven a $70,000 sports car purchased with my tuition money. The man who had complained to me about the agonizing stress of managing his aggressive growth portfolios. The former groom who had stood in a ballroom holding vintage champagne, bragging about his self-made success. He was standing on the hot asphalt, earning minimum wage plus tips, parking my car. Trevor froze. His hand remained locked on the chrome door handle. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and entirely defeated. His eyes darted from the pristine interior of the brand-new luxury SUV up to my tailored professional audit suit, and finally met my gaze. He opened his mouth. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked like he wanted to apologize. He looked like he wanted to explain how the bankruptcy had destroyed his credit, forcing him to take the only manual labor job he could find on the island. He looked desperate for a sliver of sibling recognition, a momentary pause in the humiliation. I did not offer him a lifeline. I did not sneer at him. I did not laugh. I did not lean close and whisper a triumphant cinematic threat about how the mighty had fallen. I looked at him with the exact same blank professional courtesy I would offer any stranger wearing a name tag. I reached into my wallet. I pulled out a crisp $5 bill. I extended my hand and held the folded currency out toward him. Trevor stared at the money, his jaw clenched tightly. A dark, ugly flush of profound humiliation crept up his neck, staining his cheeks red. He knew that refusing the tip would result in a reprimand from his manager standing 10 feet away. He knew he had no leverage, no power, and no escape route. He slowly raised his hand. His fingers trembled as he took the $5 bill from my grasp. "Thank you," I said. My voice was cool, brisk, and entirely detached. I slid into the driver's seat. I pulled the heavy door shut, sealing the humid air and the ruined man outside. I pressed the start button. The electric engine engaged silently. I shifted the car into drive and merged smoothly into the outbound traffic lane, leaving the resort behind. I checked the rearview mirror once. Trevor was still standing on the curb, clutching the crumpled $5 bill, watching my taillights disappear down the palm-lined avenue. The emotional detachment was the final, devastating blow. Screaming at him would have proved he still occupied space in my mind. Handing him a tip and driving away confirmed he was nothing more than a minor logistical convenience on a Tuesday afternoon. The 18 years of manufactured poverty and psychological warfare had officially concluded. The ledger was closed, the balance was settled. I drove north, navigating the winding coastal highway toward my secluded property. The ocean sparkled a brilliant turquoise under the late afternoon sky. I rolled the windows down, letting the salt wind rush through the cabin. Tonight, I was hosting a dinner party. It was going to be a loud, chaotic, and joyful celebration. And for the first time in 19 years, the menu was going to include a cake that was not vanilla. The sun dipped below the horizon at Waimea Bay, painting the evening sky in bruised shades of violet and deep burning orange. The coastal wind swept off the Pacific Ocean, carrying the sharp scent of salt and blooming plumeria across the teakwood deck of my North Shore home. I stood near the railing, listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shoreline. Strings of warm golden lights hung suspended above the patio, casting a soft glow over the outdoor dining table. It was July 14th, my 31st birthday. For the first 18 years of my life, this date was a monument to my own insignificance. It was a day of sweeping the lanai, eating stale granola bars, and watching my parents shower my older brother with unearned praise. Today, the date belonged entirely to me. It was a milestone marked not by blood, but by the quiet, unshakable peace of a fortress funded by truth. The sliding glass doors opened behind me. Laughter spilled out onto the deck, rich and genuine. I turned around to watch my guests settle into the woven patio chairs. My chosen family did not look like a traditional holiday greeting card. We were bound together not by genetics, but by a shared refusal to tolerate deception. Marcus Sterling sat at the head of the table. The formidable bank executive had traded his bespoke charcoal suits for a relaxed linen shirt. He held a bottle of local craft beer, leaning back and telling a story about a complex corporate merger. He looked decades younger than the man I had met in that sterile downtown office a year ago. Beside him sat his daughter, Harper. The shadow of her disastrous engagement to my brother was long gone. She looked radiant, her skin glowing from a day spent diving on the coastal reefs for her marine conservation nonprofit. She laughed at her father's story, her eyes bright and unburdened. Across from them sat Miriam Vance. The ruthless forensic accountant wore her signature sharp glasses and a dark blazer, even in the tropical heat. She swirled a glass of expensive dry red wine, occasionally interrupting Marcus to correct a minor financial detail in his story. The two of them sparred with the easy mutual respect of veteran tacticians. I walked over and took my seat at the center of the table. No one asked me to clear the plates. No one asked me to lower my voice. No one handed me a dense legal document disguised as a routine tax form. We ate fresh-caught ahi tuna and grilled vegetables, passing the serving bowls back and forth. The conversation flowed without hidden agendas, without traps, and without the exhausting burden of performative gratitude. When the plates were cleared, Harper stood up and walked into the kitchen. She returned a moment later carrying a large, heavy bakery box. She set it down in the center of the teakwood table and lifted the cardboard lid. For 2 decades, the only birthday dessert allowed in my parents' house was vanilla. It was a bland, predictable flavor, chosen exclusively because it was Trevor's favorite. It was the taste of my own erasure. The dessert sitting on my table tonight was a massive, vibrant lilikoi passion fruit cake. The glaze was a shocking, brilliant pink, catching the light from the overhead bulbs. Toasted coconut flakes dusted the edges. It was loud, unapologetic, and undeniably tart. Marcus handed me a silver cake knife. Miriam raised her wineglass in a silent, respectful toast. I sliced into the bright pink icing. I handed the first plate to Harper, the second to Marcus, and the third to Miriam. I took the final slice for myself. I picked up my fork and took a bite. The flavor was a sudden, sharp shock of citrus, followed immediately by the rich, melting sweetness of the buttercream. It tasted like autonomy. It tasted like waking up. As we sat together under the Hawaiian night sky, my mind briefly registered the people who were absent from this table. There had been no cinematic, tearful apologies. Brenda never showed up at my doorstep begging for forgiveness. David never grew a spine. They faced the reality of the federal justice system, an entity that does not care about local gossip or PTA committees. Federal prosecutors maintain a 98% conviction rate. Faced with Miriam's flawless paper trail, their high-priced defense attorney advised them to take a plea deal. Brenda was currently awaiting transfer to a minimum security federal facility in California to serve a 36-month sentence for wire fraud. David received 5 years of supervised probation and mandatory community service. Trevor was trapped in his polyester uniform, parking cars for tourists who tipped him with crumpled dollar bills. They were locked inside the consequences of their own greed. They no longer occupied space in my daily thoughts. When the dinner conversation shifted to Harper's upcoming diving expedition, I quietly pushed my chair back from the table. I smiled at my friends, silently signaling that I needed a moment to myself. I walked barefoot down the wooden stairs of the deck, stepping onto the cool, damp sand of the private beach. 50 yards from the house, a ring of dark stones formed a fire pit. A small fire crackled inside, the orange and yellow flames snapping against the salty wind. I reached into the pocket of my dress. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of thick, heavy paper. It was the final artifact of my previous life. I pulled the paper out and unfolded it under the moonlight. It was the back page of the irrevocable liability waiver. The bottom edge was warped, stiff, and stained with the distinct brown rings of spilled iced tea. The signature line remained blank, destroyed by the deliberate clumsiness of a daughter who refused to surrender. This single sheet of paper represented the exact moment the balance of power shifted. It was the physical manifestation of my mother's arrogance and my own awakening. I stepped up to the edge of the fire pit. The heat radiating from the stones warmed my skin. I held the tea-stained waiver over the dancing flames. I did not say a prayer. I did not offer a final dramatic monologue to the wind. I simply let go. The heavy cardstock drifted downward, landing softly on the glowing red embers. The edges curled inward immediately. The heat blackened the arrogant, dense legal jargon, transforming the ink into soot. A moment later, the center of the page caught fire. A bright yellow flame consumed the ruined signature line. I stood in the sand and watched until the paper was reduced to nothing but delicate, weightless white ash. A sudden gust of ocean wind swept through the stones, lifting the ash into the air and scattering it into the dark expanse of the Pacific. It was gone. I turned my back to the ocean and looked up at my house. The golden lights glowed warmly against the dark silhouette of the Norfolk pines. Inside, Marcus was laughing at a joke Harper made. Miriam was pouring another glass of wine. They were waiting for me to return. I want to step out of this story for a moment and speak directly to you. If you are listening to this and you recognize the pattern of my life and your own, I need you to understand a fundamental truth. Society places a massive, crushing weight on the concept of family. We are taught that blood is a sacred bond, that loyalty is mandatory, and that forgiveness is a requirement for healing. We are taught to confuse leverage with love. When someone holds your housing, your finances, or your basic sense of belonging hostage to force your compliance, they do not love you. They are managing an asset, and you do not owe gratitude to a manager who is actively draining your accounts. True revenge is not about destroying your abusers. Destroying them requires you to remain engaged in their toxic ecosystem. It requires you to keep playing their game. True revenge is outgrowing the need for them entirely. It is stepping off their game board, securing your own perimeter, and letting the natural, unavoidable consequences of their actions consume them while you build a life they can never touch. If you are the forgotten one, the scapegoat, the quiet daughter who scrubs the floors while the golden child receives the applause, hear this. Stop waiting for a tearful apology that is never going to arrive. Stop trying to convince people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Gather your evidence, secure your independence. Find your own forensic accountant, whether that is a literal professional or simply your own unwavering intuition. When the time is right, do not scream. Do not argue. Mail the envelope. Build a door that only opens from the inside, and when they finally realize what they have lost, make sure they are standing on the outside, looking at a fortress they cannot breach. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If my journey resonated with you, if you have ever had to sever a toxic bond to protect your own peace, tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Hit the subscribe button so you do not miss the next story on the Eva Tells Stories channel. There is another video linked on the screen right now about a woman who uncovered a devastating secret hidden inside her grandmother's will. You will want to see how she handled her own reckoning. Take care of yourselves and protect your peace. When we look back at the wreckage of Leilani's story, it is tempting to focus entirely on the numbers. The $1.2 million, the frozen offshore accounts, the seized yachts, and the sheer breathtaking scale of the financial heist. But if we peel back the layers of forensic audits and federal subpoenas, the true tragedy of the Kai family isn't found in a bank ledger. It is found in the scent of a vanilla cake baked for a brother, while a 16-year-old girl swept the lanai and wondered why the day of her birth was a burden to the people who gave her life. This story forces us to hold a mirror up to the traditional American family structure and ask a profoundly uncomfortable question. What does it actually mean to raise a child? In American culture, there is an immense, unspoken pressure to project the illusion of the perfect nuclear family. We are conditioned to chase the outward markers of domestic success: the pristine suburban lawn, the luxury vehicles in the driveway, the framed holiday portraits featuring matching outfits and wide, effortless smiles. But a house is only as strong as its foundation. When that foundation is built on performative status rather than radical honesty, the structure becomes a cage. Parenting in its truest and most sacred form is not a management position. Children are not assets to be leveraged, nor are they extensions of a parent's ego. The highest responsibility of a mother or a father is to provide a sanctuary of fairness and emotional awareness. This means seeing a child for exactly who they are, validating their inherent worth, and guiding them toward an independent, resilient adulthood. Brenda and David failed this fundamental duty in every conceivable way, and the tragedy is that they failed both of their children. It is easy to view Trevor simply as the villainous, entitled beneficiary of Leilani's stolen trust. But looking through the lens of long-term parental guidance, Trevor was just as much a victim of his mother's toxic architecture. By shielding him from the reality of hard work, by handing him luxury condos and sports cars he did not earn. Brenda crippled him. She did not prepare him for the world. She prepared him for a curated terrarium that could only be sustained through theft. True family responsibility means allowing your children to face the consequences of their actions, to learn the sting of failure, and to build their own character. By denying Trevor the dignity of his own struggle, Brenda ensured that when the artificial floor was finally pulled out from under him, he would not know how to stand on his own 2 feet. He was left standing in a valet uniform, utterly destroyed by a reality he was never taught to navigate. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Leilani was subjected to a different, much darker failure of parental duty. The erasure of her birthday was a masterclass in psychological starvation. In a healthy family, birthdays are not just about cake and presents. They are a deeply emotional ritual. They are the days parents look at their children and say, "I am so glad you are here. The world is better because you exist." By deliberately withholding that validation, Brenda and David weaponized Leilani's basic human need for belonging. They taught her that her value was conditional, tied only to her silence and her utility. This highlights the absolute necessity of emotional awareness in raising children. A child's spirit is porous. They absorb the unspoken subtext of a home long before they can understand the words being spoken. When parents lack emotional intelligence, when they treat love as a transaction, meting out affection to the child who boosts their social image, while freezing out the child who challenges their control, they plant the seeds of a lifelong trauma. The traditional family structure is meant to be a child's first classroom in justice and equity. It is where we learn how to share, how to apologize, and how to trust. When parents introduce deceit into that ecosystem, they fundamentally warp a child's understanding of human connection. If the people who are biologically programmed to protect you can look you in the eye and lie about the money they are stealing, how do you ever learn to trust a partner, a friend, or the world at large? Leilani survived because she possessed an extraordinary innate resilience. She had to become her own mother and her own father. She had to teach herself the lessons of fairness, accountability, and boundaries that Brenda and David refused to provide. But survival should not be the benchmark of a successful childhood. No child should have to build a fortress to protect themselves from the people who were supposed to be their safety net. As we navigate our own lives, raising our own families in a society that constantly distracts us with the pursuit of more wealth, more status, more visible perfection, we must remember the core lesson of the Kai family. Honesty is not just a moral ideal. It is the oxygen that keeps a family alive. Fairness is not about dividing everything perfectly in half. It is about ensuring that every child feels equally seen, equally valued, and equally safe. If you are a parent, your long-term goal should be eventual obsolescence. You want to raise children who are so emotionally secure, so confident in their own worth, and so grounded in truth that they can walk out into the world and build their own doors. You do not bind them to you with leverage, guilt, or financial manipulation. You bind them to you with the one currency that never depreciates: unconditional love. These are the quiet, devastating truths we carry with us behind closed doors. They are the stories that shape who we love, how we trust, and why we build the boundaries we do. If you find yourself reflecting on the dynamics of your own upbringing, or if you are seeking a community that understands the complicated, sometimes painful reality of family dynamics, I invite you to subscribe and follow the channel Eva Tells Stories. Here, we unpack the narratives that challenge us, heal us, and ultimately remind us that we are never alone in our experiences. In the end, Leilani's story leaves us with a lingering, haunting thought. Look around your own dining room table. Look at the faces of the people you call family. Are the bonds connecting you woven from the strong, unbreakable threads of mutual respect and honest affection? Or are they held together by polite silences, unspoken obligations, and the heavy weight of secrets left buried behind the wood? When the lights go out and the performative smiles fade, only you know the true cost of the seat you occupy, and only you can decide if the cake you are being served is